Solitude, being alone with God, and this is carrying on in terms of what we call the spiritual disciplines. And what is solitude? We talked about worship, we've talked about a lot of what we call the corporate types of disciplines, where we do it with other people. But solitude is not about that. And what is solitude? It's when we create an open, empty space in our lives deliberately by abstaining from something, from interaction with other people and with other things, so that we can be found and listen to God. It's where we intentionally withdraw from social engagement in that. Richard Foster, whose book we're using as the kind of basis on that. I mean, there's a lot of people talk about the disciplines, but he says, solitude's more a state of mind than it is, and heart, than it is a place. Okay, you can be by yourself and not be in solitude. You can just be very lonely, and that's different. There's a solitude of the heart that can be maintained at all times, and crowds, or the lack of them, have little to do with the inward attentiveness. And solitude is really about the what we call intentionality, that we want to be. We made a conscious choice to spend time with God. If it just happens that I'm kind of Billy no mates and I've got no friends and nobody speaks to me or something, that doesn't necessarily mean I'm in solitude with God. It means I'm just alone. Okay? If I want solitude with God, I'm spending that time intentionally with that. Okay? We can be disengaged from other people and not by choice, and that is loneliness, and that's not a nice place to be, and that's not what we're talking about. So it's the intentional withdrawal from social engagement. It's being alone with God for an extended period of time, which could be measured in minutes, because it can be very hard to be by that. But it's an extended period of time which we have nothing else to do but to wait with and on the Lord. Solitude is really just what it says. Being alone with God. And sometimes it's tied in with silence. It doesn't have to. There's kind of mixed views on that. Some people say that you can't have solitude without silence and all that. But in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verses 1 and 7, to everything there's a season and a time to every purpose under heaven. A time to keep silent and a time to speak. When we're talking about solitude, we're talking about a time to be quiet. So in the spiritual realm, it's not the absence of all noise, it's the absence of the human created noise that we're talking about. So I can have solitude. I mean, I'm talking now and I can hear the birds. I can go out for a walk, and depending where I go, hopefully there's not many people around or no people around, and it'll still be a bit noisy, maybe with the birds and the water if I'm by the water somewhere, but there's not that human noise and that human created noise. I haven't got my phone going, I haven't got a song playing, I haven't got whatever's going on there. Okay? And so, as I say, silence isn't essential to have solitude, but it helps. It is possible to have solitude with God in the midst of crowds, but it's a little bit harder. So I tend to say that physical isolation, stillness and silence, they enhance the solitude, but they're not required, but they definitely help. And I'll talk a little bit more about how we can kind of do it. But so remember, solitude is about us taking time out from God, from the world and everything around it that's man-made and humankind and that, so that I can spend time one-on-one with God. It's the one-on-one. I'm not having solitude now. This is corporate. Okay? And I mentioned loneliness. Solitude is being alone, but it's not loneliness. Loneliness has this inner emptiness, whereas solitude is looking for inner fulfillment. Okay? And that's not kind of getting mystical and that sort of stuff, but it is, we are seeking solitude to meet with God. And it's not a concept by Malcolm or Richard Foster or other things. There's lots of biblical examples of people who practice solitude. Moses would spend time apart. He'd set himself apart to be alone with God, often for extended periods of times. In Deuteronomy 9:18, Moses is busy talking to the Israelites and kind of telling them off, like he did it a lot of times, I think, because they'd been moaning or whatever. And he said, this is Moses speaking, he said, "Then I lay prostrate before the Lord as before, 40 days and 40 nights. I neither ate bread nor drank water because of all the sin that you'd committed in doing what was evil in the sight of the Lord to provoke him to anger." It was a 40-day one. I mean, he put in fasting in there as well, but he was there for 40 days. And he met regularly. Moses met regularly with the Lord. In Exodus 33, verse 7 and 11, the first part of 11, it said, "Now Moses used to take the tent and pitch it outside the camp, far off from the camp, and he called it the tent of meeting. And everyone who sought the Lord would go out to the tent of meeting, which was outside the camp." And then in verse 11, first part, "Thus the Lord used to speak to Moses face to face, as a man speaks to his friend." And Moses was doing that by himself. And Elijah, God spoke with Elijah when he was alone. It was actually what I'd prayed about when Elijah had just had that encounter. I guess an encounter. He basically called God and destroyed all the prophets of Baal and that, and then Jezebel threats to kill him, and he runs off because he's scared. And in 1 Kings 19:4, "But he," that's Elijah, "he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree." And God met him there. Verse 9, Elijah, came to a cave and lodged in it. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him and said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" In other words, Elijah pulled himself away from things, and God met with him. And Jacob, in Genesis chapter 32:24, this is Jacob's busy travelling, and this is this whole thing where he wrestles, and it says, "And Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the break of day," because Jacob was alone when he was meeting God. And then we have God himself in the form of Jesus, God incarnate. He spent time alone with his Father, which, if nothing else, should say to us, there's probably something in this. If it's good enough for Jesus, probably quite good for us to pick on these as well. I'll just go through a number of different things. Matthew 14:23. After Jesus had dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. Matthew 14, verses 10 to 13. He, being Herod, sent and had John, this is John the Baptist, beheaded in prison, and his head was brought on a platter and given to the girl, and she brought it to her mother. And his disciples came and took the body and buried it. And they went and told Jesus. Now when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a desolate place by himself. But when the crowds heard about it, they followed him on foot. But Jesus withdrew when he was in time of grief. Mark 1:35, and rising very early in the morning while it was still dark, he, Jesus, departed and went outside to a desolate place, and there he prayed. Mark 6:31 to 32. Jesus inviting the disciples to have that. He said, then because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat, Jesus said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. Luke 4. And when it was day, Jesus departed and went into a desolate place. Luke 5. But Jesus would withdraw to desolate places and pray. Luke 6. Jesus went out to a mountainside to pray and spent the night praying to God. When Jesus was going to be crucified, when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane, can you get that in Luke 22? And Jesus withdrew, he'd gone out with the disciples, and Jesus withdrew from them about a stone's throw and knelt down and prayed. In other places in the Bible it talks about this. In Psalm 46 verse 10 it says, "Be still and know that I am God." It does carry on in there, but Be still. It's much easier to be still in solitude than it is in a crowd. And in Lamentations chapter 3 says, the Lord is good to those whose hope is in him. To the one who seeks him, it is good to wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. It is good for a man to bear the yoke while he is young. Let him sit alone in silence, for the Lord has laid it on him. And Jesus also encouraged and exhorted us to model his prayer in solitude. He said in Matthew 6, he said, but when you pray, go into your room and pray to the Father who is in secret, and shut the door. So we're encouraged within the Bible. We see examples and encouraged there to spend time. It's not the only thing that we're going to do. These disciplines, it's not like we'll do that only in that. It's a lifestyle. But Jesus practiced solitude. This is God walking on earth, meeting with everybody and healing and teaching and all that, and yet he found it essential, I would suggest, to spend that time to pull apart from that. So why solitude? Isn't it good enough to come to church? Let's find the really big churches with a couple of thousand people, and we've got that. We can get caught up in it, and we can hear it, and God speaking through other people and the songs and all the rest of it. Yes, that happens. But actually, we should practice solitude, I think, because there's a lot of reasons why solitude is beneficial as part of our Christian walk and experience. One of the terms uses reasons why solitude is necessary for spiritual formation. It's helping our spiritual walk, because when we're by ourselves, we realise that God is with us. It's kind of, sometimes we don't like to be alone. We're most people, we're human beings. We're called social animals. I know there's varying degrees, and some people, introverts and extroverts, and sometimes an extreme introvert will be very happy just by themselves. But the majority of us need human company, some much more than others, and it can be very difficult for us individually to kind of pull apart, because what am I going to do? And even now, sort of, if you're by yourself, or people are by themselves, we'll whip out the phone and we'll read through or listen to something. We can't just sit and be. We find it very hard in our society. Encourage us to do that. But when we're by ourselves, we realise that God is with us, because it's when we're most by ourselves that we realise God is actually with us. Because I've got nothing else to think about, and it's kind of, is this just it? And then I'm realising God is there. Because in a group, I can listen to what other people are doing, I can get caught up in what's going on. But at that point, when I'm just me, and God is there, and I'm realising God is there, I can grow closer, and I can allow God to start talking with me. And I can learn to take pleasure in being alone with God. And yes, the good answer is that yes, I love being alone with God. But the reality is, sometimes I'm not that keen to do that for various reasons. I might just feel blah, I might feel guilty or whatever. And I want to be able to take pleasure in God, but I have to practice that and learn it. And for me, it's kind of thinking, well, if I've got friends and I like spending time with them, why wouldn't I want to spend time with God? Yet I can find it very easy to think of other things to do than to maybe spend time with God, because part of me thinks it's going to be a bit boring, isn't it, Malcolm? We're just going to sit there and kind of, it's just going to be me and God. It's going to be a bit boring. And yet I know that at times when I've done that and God has met with me, and I've met with God, that I feel refreshed and enhanced because there. So we're learning to take pleasure in being alone with God, which is great, because God wants that relationship with us. So being by ourselves, we're realising God's with us, we're taking pleasure, and it gives us time to allow God to examine us. I'm not too keen about that sometimes, because I know I can see what's in me, at least quite a bit of it, and I'm sure God sees even deeper in what's really going on, and I know that I don't like a lot of the stuff that I see in me. And I don't really want God sometimes to examine us. It's kind of, God, deal with my life in that part. It's like singing the songs, take all of me, and I give everything to you. And actually, in all honesty, I don't really want you to, God, because that is really scary. Because if I tell you to take, to have your way with me, God, I really might not like what you're going to do. And that's faith thing there. But when I'm having the solitude there, then it gives that time to allow God to examine us. Okay? It can be a time where we get to know God more deeply because we've got nothing else that's kind of coming. I can listen to what Andrew's saying, or Michelle, or what Sheila's bringing with the songs, and they're great, and there's nothing wrong with them at all. But what about God speaking to Malcolm directly with nobody else being involved in that? What about God speaking to Kiki directly with nobody else being involved? If we talk about being Christian and that God is with us, then he can do that. Then why wouldn't he? Why shouldn't I make space for that to happen? And just being with God. So we can allow God to do that, and when we do that, the term there exposes our idols. As I said, we might kind of say that, oh yes, I prefer God's company to any other person's thing, but really sometimes I would rather play a game on the PC, or on my tablet, or read a book, or listen to some music, or go for a walk, or something. I'm being honest here that I don't. Sorry, if you want somebody whose passion in life all the time is to spend time with God alone, it is not. And that's not saying that we have to be isolated all the time, but it's saying that it's exposing what's in our life. Am I filling my life with things to escape from things, to hide from things? And when I'm with God, he's able to say, hang on, Malcolm, why are you doing this? Why do you not spend more time? Is this what's going on? Okay? Because when we're alone with God, then we get a clearer view of the other things that are competing with us. And we're presented with that opportunity to repent, to talk with God, to allow him to do that. And I find when I spend time in solitude with God, it does refocus what's going on and what's really important. Because there's so many things that go on, and you go, oh, that's really important, and they are. But it's kind of coming back to going, what's really important? And actually, Malcolm, what is God saying to you that's important? In the Christian walk, I'm sure many of us know, there's lots of things that, we can read through the Bible if we wanted to and just go, we need to do this, this and this, and there's lots of things that we can be told to do, but not everything I should be doing, because we're a body. And I don't have to do everything, and I shouldn't be doing everything. What is God asking Malcolm to do? What is God asking Bob to do? What is God asking Ross to do? What's God asking Joseph to do? And when I have that solitude, then I've got that refocus, allowing God to say to me, this is what's important for you. God's saying these are the important things, and I can start to see when I'm spending time with God that these other things actually maybe not quite so important, because it's a focus, and I can allow God to bring to mind the things that he's told me in the past. And they may be in solitude, they may be in times like this, singing songs from a sermon or whatever, that God has said, hey, this is, and then just balance it and work out what's going on. Solitude can also be a kind of a context for other disciplines. In terms of reflection and meditation, fasting and that, we can combine those in. So that's a good thing. But in solitude, we're listening to God's voice and my own voice. Because in solitude, I haven't got my phone. I haven't got the radio on. I haven't got the TV on. I'm not doing anything else. I'm sitting there listening to God. Solitude involves listening. Okay? It doesn't always involve speaking, but it should always involve listening. And so I'll set that time apart and listen to what God is saying. What is he saying to me? What am I saying to me? What's my mind going on? And give that to God and allow him to start sorting out what's there. It's not saying everything in my mind is necessarily wrong, but it's, let's check it out with what God is saying. And in that solitude, I had that time to sit there. Sometimes in the past when I've been at work conferences, one of the things I really quite like about going to a day conference or something about that is actually, half the time, I mean, I do a thing called records management, so I've been to loads of conferences and I'll sit there, and a lot of the time actually, because I'm out of the office, it's kind of, and I'm writing down notes, nothing to do with the conference, but I've had time to freewheel my mind. Because I've taken time, because I'm out of the work thing, and that works, and I've had that time. Well, can't I do that with my own life, with God? To just kind of step back and not just keep doing running through, doing what I'm doing, Okay, so I'm involved in leading the church, right, I've got to keep doing that, all these things to go, and they're not necessarily bad, but I can just spin so much that I just need to step back and say, God, and God can say, this is what's important. Why don't we practice solitude? Someone said, probably the simplest and most common reason that we avoid being alone with God is that it forces us to face everything in our lives head on. I have to kind of face up to the fact that I'm not perfect, and I know that, but it's still not nice kind of recognising that. And it can be a very difficult thing, and it can be nicer to be with other people, because, and again, I'm not saying that we should not be there. Please don't hear me wrong. I'm not saying we should all go and be hermits and live in caves and not speak to anybody, but I'm saying there's a time for this, because if all I do is with other people, then where am I having that one-on-one time with God where He's dealing with me and I'm listening to Him and not other people? And that's not saying God doesn't speak to other people, but allowing God to really do that and getting that noise out of my life. Our life is so noisy when we think about it. We're in a society that's just continually putting stuff. It's just interesting to sort of watch some of the TV programs and just kind of, we are getting a dumbed down society that you watch a TV program, and even the dramas, and they'll tell you the recap, and then they'll tell you what's going to happen next week. I don't want to know what's happening next week, I'll do it. Or you watch some hour-long program, some cooking program or something with ads in the middle, so it's 45 minutes. So they tell you what's going to come on up in this next 45 minutes, and we'll take an ad break and we'll tell you what, just before what we've said, we'll come back, we'll tell you what we've just said and what's going to come up, and you end up with about 10 minutes. We've got noise going on all the time. Let's step back and allow God to just speak with us and put the noise apart. And it can be very difficult in the noise to hear what God is saying. So how do we do solitude? Is it just a matter of kind of pulling apart? Well, because as I said, it's being intentional. So let's plan, okay? It's unlikely we'll accidentally stumble into solitude. It's kind of, whoops, I just stumbled into it. We're more likely to stumble into going to somebody's place or meeting up with them. So let's plan. And I'm not talking about a massive big list of stuff, but let's plan to have some times of solitude. That's not unspiritual to do so. Saying, I'm going to plan to do that. Jesus would have planned to, right, I'm going up to that mountain, don't come with me. Moses planned to do these things. Okay, so let's, and it doesn't need to be a really special place that's really super stuff. It may just, maybe going for a walk somewhere, if you find somewhere, maybe a room somewhere. I mean, we can go to Waverley Abbey. They've now got a prayer hut there. You could go to. You could go and rent that for £10 for half a morning or something, or just go into another church building somewhere. A lot of the time, they're very, there's not always people in those. So we can plan. And solitude requires time. Can't go, right, I'm going to have 5 seconds of solitude, God. That's, there we are, I've done my patience. No, we need time. Sometimes it might only be a few minutes, and that's okay. But let's, but there's also a place for a longer periods of solitude, but it does require some time. It's not the sort of thing we can just fit in by its very definition. It's going to do that. And as I say, it's listening. And the solitude and the silence involves the absence of speech. It always involves the act of listening. And it doesn't have to involve silence, and by that I mean we may wish to respond by singing in that. I'm not talking about having solitude and then putting on a record or some music or something else like that. I don't think it's kind of it. I would say that what you want to do is try and be as quiet as you can. You may wish to respond verbally or something like that. So you don't have to oh, I spoke, that's not solitude. No, I think it is, but it's that outside bit. So those are kind of some principles that we want to do it, but how do we actually do this stuff called solitude? And there's just whole piles of ways. I mean, let's look at simple ways of doing it. Because if it's too complicated, if you're like me, you kind of go, oh, that's really good, and then you never do it. It's like looking at cooking programs. You've got Heston Blumenthal, you look at these recipes and they're really fantastic. And I don't know if anybody ever makes anything that Heston does, because it looks really wonderful, but it's so complicated that most of us don't have liquid nitrogen as a stock item in my cupboard, to cook with. But I'm going to pick up some of maybe the other chefs who say, well, you can do this with some bread and some eggs and flour and stuff like that, and look at that. So in our life, let's look at simple ways that we can incorporate solitude and silence into our daily routine. Okay? So that's we don't need to be completely physically isolated, but if we can, that can help. And that could be, for me, it could be going up into our garage, because if Michelle's in the house, she might be in a different room, but we've talked about this, that's one of the drawbacks of working from home. Sort of, we're always there, and even if she's in another room, she's still in the house. So I will go up to the garage, or maybe I'll go for a walk or ride in the MOD land, or something like that. But I'll go somewhere where I can get some silence. Wherever for you works. Just getting out of something, being physically isolated helps. It doesn't mean you have to, but it certainly helps you when you do that. Had a friend I knew who he'd been asked by a mission society would he be the house parents for these people, and this is in New Zealand, and so Ross spent, I think he went hiking in New Zealand. Okay, it's kind of like rambling on steroids. If you go hiking in New Zealand, then you take all your food with you, because there are no shops around, so you take your backpack, and he went up to a hut in the middle. It's kind of forest, and like you're 40 miles through roads anyway, so there's nobody around you. But he went up there for a period for 3 or 4 days to spend time. He took himself out to listen to God. Okay. Turn off all input, especially our phones, things like that. It's just I've kind of realised when I was a kid, and you probably same sort of. You had your landline, and if you weren't at home, then that was it. And then we've got these things called answer phones, so you could pick up your messages. And now we've got the mobile phone, and I kind of feel guilty if I don't answer it immediately that it rings. Well, hang on, why should I have to answer it immediately because it rings? It's actually quite interesting. When we were in Dubai, I had it on silent because I discovered that it was £1 a minute to talk. Well, I'm not speaking on this phone, and that includes answering a phone call. So it was on silent the whole time, but I mean, it was a spam call or something. But I kept getting these phone things, and then there was a message, and I kind of felt, should I answer these or not? Not when I was working, but it was on silent. But let's turn off the phone so that we're not even tempted to do that. So that input, because what I'm doing is I'm trying to take stuff away that's going to distract me from sitting there listening to God, and intentionally consecrate the time. In other words, and again, it might sound kind of intentionally consecrating the time sounding really spiritual stuff, but what I'm saying is just, God, I want to spend some time with you now. Can we spend 10 minutes? And spend 10 minutes. I'm not talking about, start off doing an hour, and after 10 minutes you can't think of anything. But do that. Just some little things, I'll just read you. There's all sorts of different things, wake up, and again, you can work out whether they work for you or not, Wake up 20 minutes before the rest of your family does, or if you're a night owl, stay up a little longer than everybody else, and have that time. Treat your shower like a fortress of solitude. It's the closest most of us get to a monastic cell each day. That may or may not work for you. I never thought of my shower as a monastic cell, but there we are. Do your daily run or your workout in silence. A lot of the time when people are doing exercise, they've got earphones in, but this person sort of said, I know the music gets you pumped up, but you'll be shocked by the number of insights that come to you when you exercise in silence. For myself, if I go cycling, I never wear headphones when I'm cycling. I go on the mountain bike and I'll go into the MOD land or stroll around the place, and I never have anything in my ears at all. And yeah, a lot of the time I'm kind of freewheeling my mind, and that is this time of solitude, and I do get insights. And so that's the sort of thing we can do. Commute to work in silence. If you're in the car, maybe turn the radio off or something. And especially if you're travelling. It's interesting. Yesterday we got I'm going to be doing a survey. This guy knocked on the door and said, would you be happy to do a survey about your radio listening habits? Okay, I listen to it, and the only time I ever do listen to the radio actually is in the car. But if you're spending a lot of time in the car then, and you're by yourself, that could be a time of solitude. So as I say, it doesn't have to be a holy consecrated place. It's making time. On the way home from work, stop at a church. It's open, a church building, and sit in a pew for 10 minutes. When I work in, when we go out to different places, we'll often pop into church buildings, but when I work in London, often I'll try and find a church building around the place. For me, this is sounding pretty spiritual, it's not supposed to be, but that's what I find really helpful at lunchtime sometimes, just to go there. And a lot of the Anglican churches, they're really nice because they're quite dark, they're designed to give you that thing. I mean, yes, we can meet in here as a church building, that's fine, but there's something different about a building with some stained glass and everything, and it's got a different feel to it, and so I can sit there in silence and have that. Instead of getting out of bed as soon as your alarm goes off, or immediately checking your phone on waking, just lie there for a few minutes in silence and listen to God. It may or may not work if your alarm goes off and your husband or wife is kind of banging you or snoring or whatever. But do that. It says, turn your coffee making, drinking routine into a silent, rejuvenating ritual. For me, that is actually one of the times that I find really helpful in the morning. When I get out of bed in the morning, I get, the alarm, if it goes off, it's turned off really quickly because it will wake Michelle. I would rather listen to it, but she turned it. But then I don't want to see anybody, in all honesty, for about 20-30 minutes in the morning. I want my time to wake up and I have my coffee and stuff like that. So that, I'm not saying I spend it in solitude with God, but that's the time that I kind of do. So build that in. And one of the ones down there, consider doing a regular retreat. This is where you set aside more than maybe 10-15 minutes each day, and it's not an either or, maybe just maybe a quarterly retreat or something where you actually take time out to listen. Both Michelle and I have done this in the past. In New Zealand, there was a convent, a Catholic convent called Star of the Sea, just near where we lived, and I would go. I think I went about 3 or 4 times. I think you did a couple of times as well. We would go separately. It's not the point to go together, but I'd go there, and I'd spend the day there. The nuns would provide me some lunch, but I was in a room by myself, and most of the time there was no one else there. It was lovely and quiet. And what I did was I had, one of the things about solitude as well, is that it can allow us to make decisions and hear from God and help us focus on all these kind of things. And for me, it was a challenge. I had some questions, and they weren't from the Bible or anything. They're just sort of life-type questions about what I want to do and things like that. And I would do that each year to sort of get a check on where's my life at, what am I thinking, what's goal? God, is there some new goals that you want for me for this year? Because I had that time inside. And it was just me, and I think we did meet, Michelle and I did go at one time together, but we were in separate rooms. I don't even know if we had lunch together or something, because actually, in all honesty, I don't want to be with someone else when I'm doing that. So it's allowing that. So consider doing a regular retreat. And there's plenty of places with friends. It was interesting on Friday, we went to some friends' place and just talking about things, and they, there's loads of different places. I mean, they've both done retreats, coming over, but there's Felderbrennen is one place I know. It's in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of Wales or something. It's a place on prayer. I'd like to go there. That would be fantastic. I'm sure we go to St Columban's in Woking as leadership. That's the kind of place. I'm sure I could hire out a room there if I wanted to. I'm sure there's loads of places. Acorn used to do it, but they don't have a building. But there's lots of opportunities. So let's let's be careful, just a word of caution. Practicing solitude, like any other discipline, we can take it to the extreme, okay? To an unhealthy extreme, okay? It's not a place to live. We're not, I don't believe most people are not called to live in excluding themselves, cut off from the world, okay? Jesus didn't live out, not cut off, but he took his time apart, and it's the same as us. So let's, we're not hermits, most of us. And we're called to be in community as well. We're called to meet together. Even on the Christian life, I'm being spiritual because I'm meeting alone. No, we're still encouraged in the Bible to not stop meeting together. But again, it's adding that in. But we need to still have that relationship with God one-on-one. Solitude is a spiritual discipline like a lot of the other ones. And spiritual disciplines are things we do. So we've had them talked about. If we simply talk about a spiritual discipline and know what it is, but we never practiced it, then we're missing the point. We just get head knowledge. So spend a few minutes now, each of us, in solitude. Think about these two things. First off, plan a specific time of solitude in the next few weeks that you are going to do. Okay? We'll have a couple of minutes and just be quiet. And then plan how you might experience regular solitude. So in other words, set yourself a goal. Right now I'm encouraging you, set yourself a goal. Say, in the next 3 weeks, at some stage, this is what I'm going to spend 10 minutes in solitude with God, and this is when I'm going to do it, this is when I'm going to do it. Set an actual specific. And then think about how you might do this regularly. Now, I'm not asking you to just go, work it all out, but at least with the first one. Is it that difficult for any of us to say, actually, I'm going to spend, in the next 3 weeks, I'm going to spend 10 minutes with God by myself, just listening with no phones. I'm not going to do a Bible study. I'm not going to do a meditation. I'm going to sit there and listen to God for 5 to 10 minutes and be quiet. And it might be that you're walking. Okay, you don't have to sit there or whatever, but so let's do that. Okay?